with Ryan.
Today we are learning basketball with Nathan King, the host of Auburn Undercover podcast, Auburn beat reporter with 247 or 24/7 Sports. Can't wait to dive into a little Auburn, Tennessee, an epic matchup of some top seeds. Dive into some of Auburn's big NBA prospects on the rise. Johni Broome might be up for National Player of the Year. Tahaad Pettiford has really impressed me, and a lot of scouts in those circles. And maybe hit on little magic hoops at the end. But first, before we even dive in, first, how you doing today, Nathan?
I'm doing great, man. I appreciate you asking me to be on, and always excited to talk some hoops.
No doubt. And before we dive in, I got to bring up the 2013 Florida State Auburn National Championship because I was a student there when it happened.
Okay.
I was at the game at the Rose Bowl, an all-time game, epic game. I don't know if you even caught it back then, but I just got to give a shout out to that undefeated Jameis Winston Florida State team. That Kelvin Benjamin in the end zone at the end, and just gotta give a shout to the football squad before we dive in.
Oh, it's crazy! It's crazy, man. I was kind of off the Auburn radar at the time. I didn't really even start. I grew up in, as I'm sure we might talk about some Magic basketball. I grew up in Orlando, Florida, and so when I moved to Alabama, didn't have an allegiance to Auburn or anything like that, and so I was a casual watcher of that game. But it's crazy, dude, because we were at the Senior Bowl this week, and Gus Malzahn was there, and it's weird to think about. He's now at Florida State. After all those years later, after that national title game, but that one certainly stings for Auburn fans, even nowadays. I mean, they look back on that one and the opportunities they had, and man, they were thinking they were going to get a second national title in the span of 3 or 4 years. It still stings about a decade later.
Hey, I'm sure the coaching cycles happen quickly in all these sports, really. And yeah, I mean, it was anybody's game. It was a back and forth. Like, there was a crazy kick return at the end. There was like a last second drive for a game winning touchdown between Jameis and Kelvin Benjamin, who obviously both went on to be pros. So it was just an epic game, an all-time moment for me as a sports fan, growing up Florida State fan, getting to see that live. So had to put the knife in the wound just a little bit, but you weren't an Auburn fan too much back then, so
Nope.
It's okay. And you just started covering the team since, so it probably doesn't hurt as badly.
My wife, so my now in-laws, they bought them tickets that Christmas. They're both, her family's big Auburn people. And they surprised them that Christmas with tickets to Pasadena. I mean, they were over the moon. They were so happy to be able to do that. And they said like Rose Bowl, just unbelievable environment. They did say it's kind of a cluster to like park and get in there, and it's the whole surrounding area is just kind of wild. But they said, I mean, obviously they would have rather Auburn have won, but they said it was an unbelievable experience. Yeah,
it's probably my favorite stadium just set up, but I can see it being a little tough to get in, but just the design, just the idea of the Rose Bowl, like the Roman Coliseum, like just being a football stadium, like it's just classic college football. But time to dive in onto the hoops side. We got an epic Auburn Tennessee game between some top seeds. You were live in attendance. That's really what I'm excited to hear about, what the vibe was like there, what it was like seeing these prospects up close. You got, Tennessee has some good prospects with Igor Milicic and Chaz Lanier, some like knockdown shooters as well that, could see their name called maybe later in the draft, but they bring some 3-point shooting. And then, Auburn, we hit on them already. So, what was it like just being there in person?
I mean, every time, look, I've been covering Auburn basketball since, it's funny, the Final Four season was my first year covering the team. So quite a way to get it rolling. I've been covering this team for 7 or 8 years now. And every time you think that they can't outdo themselves in terms of an environment, you get something like last Saturday against Tennessee. I don't know if it was the loudest I've ever heard that building, but it was certainly up there. Obviously, when Miles Kelly hits that 3 at the end of the game, it was one of the biggest crowd pops I've ever heard. And I mean, just an incredible atmosphere that started all the way back in the morning. A little bit of controversy there. The College Gameday was in town and had some students get injured, unfortunately, when they were stampeding to get in line. The university has come back since then and said, hey, we got to address this thing and figure out how we can make that safer. And that's obviously an understatement, but In the game, you mentioned Johni Broome. I mean, like, he was coming back from an ankle injury, had missed the previous 2 games. Scary looking ankle injury for him at South Carolina. His ankle turned a little bit and couldn't put any weight on it. I mean, that was one of those things where you mentioned he's one of 2 probably front runners right now for the National Player of the Year, and Auburn's season sort of felt like it hung in the balance. It turns out it wasn't too bad. Just a sprain, missed 2 games. Auburn was able to win both of those games without him, and he was questionable going into Tennessee. But it was funny. I don't know whether it was a Tennessee fan or whether it was just some clever motivational tactics by Auburn's coaching staff. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just guessing. He found some Tennessee pamphlets on his car that morning, and I think that sort of motivated him to play. But goes for 16 and 13 in his return, and missed double-digit shots, didn't have the most efficient scoring outing, but I think that was one of those performances where you can see that pro intrigue with a guy like Johni Broome, because it's everything else he does. I mean, he's obviously a guy who can score at the rim and sort of fill up the stat sheet, but look no further than that assist late in the game. I mean, misses his own shot or gets his own shot, contested at the rim, grabs his rebound right under and pushes it out to Miles Kelly. His assist rate has been really, really good this season. There was a point, I don't think anymore, but there was a point where he led Auburn in assists. That's one of the draws for him as a big man. But when you just talk about Auburn and Tennessee, I mean, Bruce Pearl and Rick Barnes both said it after the game. These are the 2 longest tenured coaches in the league. Like, they know each other. There are no secrets when they play each other. And that's one of the reasons why it was a 53-51 game. Like, there's nothing Auburn is running that Tennessee doesn't know how to defend. There's nothing Tennessee is doing. I mean, Zakai Ziegler, Chaz Lanier's a new guy, I guess, for them, but Zakai Ziegler, they know him. He's been contributing since he was a freshman at Tennessee. And so you get this defensive war. And a lot of people said it was an ugly basketball game. I'm like, I don't know, man. It was impressive. It was super, super impressive to just watch teams get after it every single possession on the defensive end of the floor. And pressure moments there at the end came down to who was going to make the big shot. Auburn ended up defending. I think Tennessee missed 4 of their last 5 shots in the game, and Auburn ends up getting the big one. They lose only their 4th 3-pointer of the game, 3rd 3-pointer of the game, but obviously they made it count with Miles Kelly from the corner, and it's still a team that's undefeated in league play.
Yeah, it just sounds like an epic experience just being there in person. A lot of college hoops, especially these rivalries, like some deep-rooted SEC rivalries, like in Auburn, Tennessee, where just the fans are even excited. That's a great story of him finding Tennessee pamphlets, and I could see that being a motivational factor just to like, what, I am going to play. I gotta show these guys what's what. And yeah, I mean, great point as well with Broome, just kind of going off, showing the full arsenal, a lot of what he can do. A lot of off-ball movement, I thought, in this one. A lot of good cuts and like slipping screens to the basket. Had like a nice, I guess, energy hustle type play where he missed a shot, but there's like a scram for the ball and he like rips it away from the Tennessee player and just puts it back in. And yeah, I mean, it had some good timing, defensive instincts too, with some shot blocks and like a good recovery with some defensive instincts, and thought he showed a lot. And I had talked with Matt Powers on this podcast before about a little bit about Broome, and what stood out to us was his like scoring versatility, and that ability to kind of score efficiently in many different ways should translate to kind of a sum of its parts effect as a scorer to the next level, where he's via synergy rated efficient in like 5 different categories. ISOs 1.2 points per game in the 93rd percentile, 1.5 on cuts, 1.2 on transition, 1.2 pick and roll man, 1.2 on putbacks, and then post-ups is his most high volume with 85 of them, and he's 0.85, which is a little lower efficient wise, but still a respectable play as a scorer, where you could see that. And it's even better when you include passes. He's up to a flat 1 point per possession on 108 possessions that include passes. So it kind of shows he can be a good little scoring valve, scoring outlet for a team at the next level, who can get a bucket himself or look to kick out, and like good feel for the game. And obviously has been around the college game for a while. What do you think his chances are of pulling out the National Player of the Year away from Cooper Flagg, who obviously has all this hype as the number 1 pick? And, I imagine voters will default to some of that draft stuff while maybe not weighing as much this season as its own like season, where Broome is right there across the box score.
I mean, this is going to be one of the more entertaining Player of the Year races we've had in the last several seasons. I thought it was good timing for Cooper Flagg when Johni Broome goes out with an injury for a couple games, really 3 games. He was largely ineffective against South Carolina and then gets injured. So like it was the better part of 3 games. And then Flagg Flagg had been fantastic. I was lucky enough. I was at that Auburn Duke game this year. I mean, just an unbelievable player. Every bit of a generational prospect, but he started going more video game mode pretty much as soon as Johni Broome went out. And so I think it has sort of turned to him being maybe at the number 1 spot right now. But then Johni Broome comes back, and it's pretty clear that he's not 100%. I asked him after the game at LSU on Wednesday, and he said, I think, how healthy are you? He said, good enough to play. I'm like, all right, well, I guess that he seemed to be kind of favoring that ankle in Baton Rouge a little bit. Got off to a frustrating start. He was 3 of 14 from the floor in the first half, but comes out and finishes 26 and 16. In that game, he had 11 offensive rebounds. Now, LSU small, they took advantage of a matchup there. There were possessions where he'd miss his own shot and no one else is within 4 inches of him, and he just grab it, put it right back in. But if he keeps doing this, and obviously you look at, again, the pedestal these 2 teams are on. These are the 2 best teams in the country, and I don't know if it's close who would be number 3, Houston and Iowa State and Alabama. They're all up there as well, but Duke and Auburn have put themselves in this completely different stratosphere. I think if he keeps doing what he's doing and Auburn goes, 15-3, I mean, that's even saying that out loud would be insane in this SEC right now. They're undefeated, but it's like they've got a lot of tough games up to go. If they win the SEC and they're the number 1 overall seed and Broome is still putting up 20 plus double doubles per game, I just don't know how you don't go with him. I mean, Cooper Flagg is probably, Cooper Flagg's probably a better player. And I think he's going to be the number 1 overall draft pick. I don't think that's an outlandish thing for me to say. But the value Johni Broome has for this Auburn team, I think is just absolutely through the roof. And so it's going to be super, super entertaining to see what happens. If Flagg keeps putting up, again, video game numbers, there's probably no way to keep it away from him. I wonder in the voters' mind, how much is going to play into this. SEC schedule versus ACC. The ACC is the weakest it's been in a long time. The SEC is quite literally the best it's been in its history as a basketball conference. And so how much does that sort of weigh into things? I will say Auburn's got some big games, some massive opportunities. Starting Saturday with a ranked game at Ole Miss. But, people have that February 15th at Alabama circled. Cinema. I cannot wait for that. And then the end of the regular season as well against Alabama. They still got Florida at home next Saturday. Those are going to be highly watched, highly scrutinized against some 1 and 2 seed contenders for the tournament. Broome has to show up in those games if he wants Player of the Year. But more so, I know I've covered Johni Broome for 3 seasons. He would trade Player of the Year in a second if it meant Auburn. Even if it meant punching a ticket guaranteed to the Sweet 16, he would absolutely. He's a guy. He didn't come back to Auburn for his 5th college season to win Player of the Year. He came back because they lost to Yale in the first round, and he thinks they have a really good team and they could, go to a Final Four. And so that's obviously where the priorities lie for him. That's where the priorities lie for this team. But it's. We were talking about it, me and my coworker on the way back from Baton Rouge. It's kind of crazy to think about what he has done and where it sort of puts him in the pantheon of Auburn greats. Is he already a top 3 Auburn player ever? It's sort of unbelievable. And the thing I think that's been impressive mostly about, and we can get into this a little bit, talking about his NBA game, he was a guy who was almost gone to the pros 2 years ago. If you remember, he went G League Combine, won an invite because of how well he did at the G League Combine. And then he's at the NBA Combine turning heads, and Bruce Pearl's sweating. He's like, am I about to lose this guy after 1 year? And he's not your prototypical pro as a center or a forward or anything, but he's got so much stuff, I think, working for him, as a versatile player. And so he's improved each season, all SEC to 3rd team All-American to this year, potential National Player of the Year. And so he's a top 3 or 4 Auburn player ever right now, I think, based on what he accomplishes this season. If they can this is a long way to go. They could lose in the first round, that happens all the time. If they can go to the Final Four and he's Player of the Year, he's the best Auburn player in their program history. So it's been unbelievable to see from him. And his NBA future is equally as intriguing as well, because he's shown a lot of stuff in that regard.
Yeah, that's high praise from the school that Charles Barkley went to, and it's funny. There's watching Broome reminds me a little bit of Chuma Okeke, who also went there and became a Magic player. Like there's a little bit of that kind of two-way feel to him, and just team first play, and a little bit of all around, can do a little bit of everything, and a little bit of a tweener position wise traditionally, but will still like can still score and bang down low. And on that point of the schedule and how tough the SEC is, I just pulled it up as you were talking about it, and they're playing 8 top 25 teams in the next couple weeks by March 8th. So over the next like month and a half, they play 3 top 5 teams, 8 ranked teams, and the 2 that aren't ranked are Oklahoma and Arkansas, who are, pretty great in their own rights, that full of pro prospects as well. So, that is just a daunting schedule for all of the SEC teams, but especially Auburn, coming up. So if they're able to go through that schedule, that really should play a big factor in Broome's case. And I think if he's there statistically, and like you said, like they maybe win out would be insanely impressive if they just have a good good record that keeps them in the 1 seed conversation by then. Yeah, I mean he definitely deserves consideration. And like you mentioned as well, it's just tough when Cooper Flagg is combining the NBA draft #1 pick hype with all the fun video game stuff, as you mentioned, that he's doing right now, and just seems to be getting better as the season goes on, as he's getting more reps, being something of like a point forward for Duke, when that was it. They're almost using him like in ways that I considered his weaknesses coming in, and now he's like getting reps in the college scene to do those things, and he's getting better at them really quickly. So it's cool to see that development, and it'll be a tight race down to the wire, and let's see if he can pull it out, no doubt. And yeah, I mean, Broome's had some. I've caught a few of his games, like against Texas. He showed like really nice soft touch around the rim. I thought he had a crazy stat line: 20 points, 12 boards, 5 assists, 2 steals, 3 blocks, just filling it up. And then had a little bit of a tough matchup with Colin Murray Boyles when I caught that one against South Carolina, and their defense overall is just insane. So it's tough to score on them. So a little bit of up and down there, but as a prospect, he just, put simply, he's a good basketball player who will probably help a team compete on both ends. And those type of players tend to do pretty well at the next level, at least trying to like build out a long career. And they kind of fit anywhere. If you can defend and do the dribble, pass, and shoot, you can score a little bit in different ways. Like those players just fit in at the next level. So, how high do you think he might be picked in the NBA draft?
I mean, certainly not as high. You mentioned like Charles Barkley and stuff. He's not going to be anywhere near those kinds of guys. And when I say, best player at Auburn, talking specifically about, what he accomplished at Auburn, because he's not going to go number 3 like Jabari Smith. He's not going to go number 4 like Isaac Okoro. He's not even an NBA prospect like Chuma Okeke was, who was coming off a knee injury. He might not even go as high as somebody like Sharif Cooper. I mean, we'll see what it ends up being for him. But I think that year, I talked to his parents after that year. I talked about his first year at Auburn when he ends up coming back. The Lakers had the 47th pick in the draft that year, and apparently he had extensive conversations with them leading up to the withdrawal deadline. Again, nothing is set in stone, and you're not going to tell a player, yeah, we're 100% going to take you, so take this with a grain of salt. But maybe a couple years ago was a guy that showed out so much in the draft process. I think the college scene now has known about him. Like it's he's a player of the year candidate on the best team in the country, but the NBA circles, he started to buzz back then. And I wonder how much that's going to matter this time around. Like you mentioned kind of the up and down performances. It's 99% of it's been up, but like there are knocks on his game. I mean, he's not a perfect pro prospect. You mentioned against Murray Boyles and Nick Pringle, who's a really big, like physical rebounder for South Carolina. Is Johni Broome the most physical 6'11" guy in the world? No, absolutely not. He's a guy who came in and wanted to be all finesse at Auburn. He was like, back to the basket. Let me show you these hook shots I got. That's it. I can get rebounds because I'm big. That's another area he has sort of developed. He is able to kind of put his chest in there, but he is still a guy who would rather lean on that skill set. You see these little, the left hand turnaround in the post is kind of his like killer move. I mean, you really can't stop it if he can make the shot at the rim, which obviously most of the time he does. Not the most physical guy in the world, but one thing we haven't talked about yet is the fact that he's playing the 4 this year, at least in their starting lineup. And that is something in the offseason, like Pearl and Auburn's coaching staff talked about the possibility of doing that because they've got Dylan Cardwell back. He's a He's fifth-year senior, a guy who just glue guy for this team. I mean, just defense, rebounding. That's pretty much all you're going to get from him. Put back dunks. They wondered how much, advantage they could take with having a bunch of size. And I remember thinking, like, I just don't know about this, because Broome, last year, the reason they unlocked him so much is because they started running 5 out with him at the top. And it's like, when you have a center that can pass and shoot like him, it becomes so difficult to defend. So I'm wondering, man, like, they're going to change this offensive scheme and put 2 centers on the floor. And Cardwell was one of those guys where it's like, all right, he's going to come in off the bench and just rim run. And I'm like, man, I'm wondering how this is going to be. For the last 2.5 months, they've had the most efficient offense in the country. So I'm like, okay, well, that goes to show what I know. And he doesn't play 4 most of the game. He plays 5 most of the game. But they start him, they give him minutes at the 4 at the beginning of each half when he's with that starting rotation. I think maybe that helps his NBA outlook a little bit. My thing is, he is like perfect college center, but he's not an NBA center, I don't think. Just because of it's funny to say lack of size. I mean, like seeing him yesterday, I mean, he's massive, but like when you look at what an NBA has at the center position right now, he's not the biggest or strongest either. In terms of a guy who can stretch the floor, he's shown his shooting touch throughout his career, has improved on that. Came into Auburn with, I think, 2 made threes in his 2 years at Morehead State, so he developed that shot. Only 28% from deep so far this season, so like that's not a massive draw for him. And then you wonder about the 4 position. Well, like, okay, is he athletic enough to like keep up? I mean, let's run down the list of like NBA 4-men. I mean, he's not that kind of guy who's going to have that bounce and be able to keep up with guys like that when they put the ball on the floor. And so you said the word tweener earlier. That is where I think it falls for him, and why I think he's not going to be like a surefire first-round pick, even if he wins Player of the Year. If he was 2 inches taller and 20 pounds heavier, he's a lottery pick, and like we're not even having this conversation. And so again, it goes back to what he's able to show these NBA teams. We've seen a lot of mock drafts recently that have had him in the first round, though, and I think that just goes to show. Going into this year, I was like, surefire, he'll be picked, surefire second round guy. Could he creep up to the end of the first round? It's going to go back to, again, there's a lot of NBA circles, I think, that like, oh yeah, remember that guy 2 years ago who came in and worked out for X, Y, and Z, franchise and did all that stuff at the combine. Well, now he's the Player of the Year, and he was the best player on the best team in the country. And so you kind of look at those notes you have. It's going to go down to what he's able to show in that regard when he gets in front of NBA teams. I wonder what kind of role he could have. I feel like I'm saying some of this stuff and it sounds derogatory, but I think he could be a guy too that tries, gives it a try in the league for a while. I think he could stick. He's got all the skills to do it. He just screams like 10-year pro overseas to me too. I mean, could you imagine this guy in the Euro League? Like, I mean, he looks like a prototypical European center. He's got all the skill set and the size to be able to do something like that. And so I think he's absolutely going to get drafted. I think the question now is, if you took him in the second round, that'd probably be a good value pick. The question is if he can come up to the end of the first round. But as you know, I mean, like the first 30 guys off the board are just complete pro prospects, guys who have been pro prospects pretty much since high school. Mid-20s, you're still talking about like fringe lottery guys who are like fell out of the lottery. And so, I mean, it's really, really tough to crack into that first round. But again, if he's Player of the Year and keeps putting up these kinds of numbers and shows like, hey, I can get on the floor and just pretty much do everything well, whatever you need me to do, it's going to be tough to keep him out of that conversation, as I'm sure we'll get to later. There's another Auburn guy who, look, they're hoping that isn't a first-round pick, but a guy who has shown a lot of skills as a freshman as well. And so would be shocked if he's not drafted. I think second round is, mid-second round is probably the floor for him. The question is, can he show enough NBA stuff to become a first-rounder? Not his focus right now, though. I don't think he's worried about showing NBA stuff. I think he's worried about, Auburn trying to win a couple championships.
Yeah, he's got his head on straight. But on the position stuff, I could, like we said, kind of could see him at the 4, maybe like a small ball 5 against second units kind of thing if he's not asked to guard the big man on the other side. He's a little bigger than I necessarily realized. 6'10", 7-foot wingspan in terms of the measurables like that. You can round out some minutes at the 5 in that sense. But yeah, maybe as a full-time probably would be more of a 4 in my mind. But, he's shown a lot of good indicators. The touch, I was on some synergy stats earlier just to looking up that's where I got the points per possession earlier. And, the touch around the rim is really good. Like he's shown like floater touch, 7 of 12 on floaters. He's got that hook shot. You mentioned 20 of 47 on those. at the rim in general, he's 81 of 122 shots for 66% and 61% on layups, 13 of 13 on dunks, 7 of 9 on tip-ins. So he's always kind of like hanging around the rim for the putbacks and the touch shots nearby the rim, and shows some other good statistical indicators. The outside shot is a little questionable, but he's definitely shown it. Like it flashed it at times, but you would like to see the free throw percentage or the 3-point percentage a little higher there. But well, he has shown some touch in some other areas, so I don't think it's like out of question that develops down the line. And good field player, like his assist to turnover ratio is 53 assists to only 22 turnovers. His blocks and steals to fouls ratio is really positive among college players, like 49 blocks plus 12 steals over 37 fouls. So, I mean, he's got about 25 extra like stocks per foul by that rate. So just to throw a few stats, and Swish Theory, the website that this podcast is with, and we just dropped our first big board. They're really high on him. The whole team is, I should say. I had him a little lower. I had him like second round, like top 40 in that 30 to 40 range. But the team has him at the 20th slot as an aggregate, like as the 20th big board prospect in the whole draft. So I mean, there's clearly fans of his game and fans of what he's doing around the league. And, I agree. I definitely think he's going to get drafted in that National Player of the Year and possibly a national championship combination of the accolades. Like that could be a big swing. I mean, it is kind of surprising how much March Madness might affect a draft stock when it's only in reality a couple of games, but it's also like the biggest stage possible to prove what you can do against the best competition. And it's also probably when like a lot of people are tuning in the most on a national scale to college hoops that aren't watching it for the full season. Maybe it's their first couple times seeing this player and they're just wowed by a hot run or something. And, we've definitely seen, players on different teams make late runs and get drafted a little higher from it. So any combination of those factors could jolt him up into that, top 20, top 30 range, I think for sure. So, definitely an impressive prospect. And to note on the Swish Theory board, they actually have 3 Auburn players on this big board that ended up on the aggregate. I'm extra high on Tahaad Pettiford, and I'm down to talk about him as well. But Chad Baker-Mazara is on here. He's 44th. And so you got Johni Broome 20th, Tahaad Pettiford 37th, and Chad Baker-Mazara 44th on the Swish Theory big board at the moment. It's the first draft, so it might update a little later. But what can you tell me about him? Because I can't say I'm overly familiar with what he brings as a prospect.
I can give you a 4th guy as well that we might be talking about.
Let's hear it.
Miles Kelly, Georgia Tech transfer, a guy who quite literally when he pulled out of the draft process, and I talked to him that day, he had just finished his workout with the Golden State Warriors. And so a guy who was pretty good in the draft process last year, really, again, we talk about, that's just, was that 5 or 6, 7 years ago? That was such a phenomenal change for the college game to allow guys to go do that and still retain their college eligibility. I mean, I feel like it's just opened so many doors for people to be able to see what their weight is out there in the pro world. So we'll talk about him a little bit. Like, I mean, Bruce Pearl calls him an NBA 3-and-D guy all the time. And like, he has gotten better as the season's gone on, was an absolute catalyst for them at LSU, kind of pulled them out of an early rut, made some plays where I'm like, man, he kind of looks like an NBA player. Chad Baker-Mazara, emotional leader for this Auburn team, a guy who is a 5th-year senior, has all the NBA length you want. 6'7" and looks like Slenderman. Like he's just got super, super long arms. He had 7 assists and 3 steals at LSU. Just a really, really good all-around player. I think his shooting numbers have kind of slumped recently, but he is a great 3-point shooter. His career 3-point percentage is above 42%. I mean, he was a guy that when they got him last year, so he was a guy who was not super highly rated out of high school, started at San Diego State, got kicked off that team for academic reasons, starts at Duquesne, transfers to San Diego State, gets kicked off for academic reason, goes to Northwest Florida State, which is you might know as a JUCO. I think he shot like 48% from 3 the entire season there. I mean, just unbelievable stuff. Mm-hmm. And now his second year at Auburn, this is the first time in his college career he's been in a place more than 1 year. And so that stability for him has been really, really important. He was the guy who was at the centerpiece of when they lost to Yale last year. And for unfortunate reasons, threw an elbow 3 minutes into the game gets tossed. And I think people realize then, hey, even if this guy's not scoring 20 points, he is such a value to this team. I mean, I try to tell people, like, it's not just like how Broome, it's not every day someone rolls out of bed and gets like 17 and 9, and then you just build upon that. Like, whatever after that is gravy. Baker-Mazara makes a couple threes, like 10 points, 4 assists, 2 steals a game, and that's kind of like his baseline. Now, what is he going to do after that? And so they realized how important he was. It kind of shocked them early on in that game. And then a really, really motivated 13 seed that had the entire arena behind them made some threes late. Like, they ended up winning that game in an upset. And so, no, but this season, Baker-Mazara, I do think he's got a little bit of NBA intrigue because of that length. 6'7", again, I don't know what his wingspan is, but pretty good. He's got great three-point shooting ability. They have 3 guys who are really, really good defenders on the perimeter, really good on-ball defenders. He is one of them. They'll just kind of put him on the other team's, two guard, if there's a wing scorer on the other end. I thought he defended Chaz Lanier really well. Really, the only scoring opportunities for Lanier were like in transition, where it was like a 2-on-2. You find him and he shoots a transition 3 ball. I don't know how many points he scored in that game, but 6 of those were just in transition. And so he's done a really good job as a defender as well. The interesting part about Baker-Mazara is with this Diego Pavia JUCO ruling, he started as a JUCO player. It checks the box for him. He would be out of eligibility. Is he going to get another year next year? And so I've talked to some people about this recently, and I think some people have been like, well, like he's if Auburn does really well and he keeps playing well and he's starting, he came off the bench for them last year. Now he's a starter, starting to flourish a little bit. Like, would he just go and take advantage of his draft stock? And I'm like, he's like 185 pounds. Like, stay in the college game, make some more money, put on 10 more pounds of muscle, and you're like the number 1 scorer next year. And so I think that is something. Could he be drafted this year? Absolutely. If I'm an NBA team and he comes in and impresses, like, use a late second round on a guy like that, I think that absolutely is worth it. But could he stay at Auburn and be even more valuable next year? Put on a little bit of muscle. He's already he worked a lot in the weight room, but man, he's still so skinny. Like, he's really, really skinny guy. And so continuing to build that up on the college level, be a 6th-year senior. He just turned 25. I don't know how that in NBA circles, like a 25-year-old rookie. I think that's usually like a negative, right, for someone to be so old. But nowadays, I mean, older college players, like, those are the teams that win a lot. And so if he were to stay another year, he would get drafted or go to the NBA as a 26-year-old. And so what does that do for his draft prospects? Not sure, but really, really interesting player. I'm sitting here rambling. I don't know if you want me to go on to Pettiford or if you wanted to interject for a second. Sorry.
You're good. That's what it's all about. And yeah, I mean, that is kind of funny to think about. He the athletic prime for pro players is considered like 27, 28. So he'd basically be a rookie entering it. And so a little late. There is a little bit of a resurgence in kind of drafting late or older rookies, I should say, more proven college guys that have a few more years of experience. These last few years, I think the draft has drifted a little bit away from like that untapped potential young guy towards that, but it's maybe later in the draft, I should say. While in the beginning, it's still pretty much younger age potential, still kind of big factors. But Chad Baker-Mazara has nice touch factors. You mentioned the shooting. I mean, 91% from the free throw line, super impressive. That's normally an indicator of future shooting development. And he's already got the 43% on catch and shoots, 32% off the dribble, but he's shown he can kind of do a little bit of both, and 1.4 points per possession in spot up situations, and including passes on ISOs, he's at 1.1. So I mean, you based on everything you're saying, you could definitely see the intrigue with forcing turnovers there, and the ability to shoot and force turnovers are paramount to success at the next level, especially for role players trying to crack spot in the rotation. And also a quick shout out to Sharife Cooper. I skipped over that, but he was just way too much fun. One of my favorite players to watch in college at the time. I think I had him like top 10. Like, I was sold on Sharife. Like, he was, if Chris Paul is point God, he was like point Jesus to me. He was just doing it all out there,
He got a bad break for sure, man. I mean, the NCAA, that's kind of all I'll say about that. I mean, the fact that he was only able to play 12 games at Auburn. Now, they were bad that year. That's the only like modern Bruce Pearl team that's been bad because they took the postseason ban and had 3 injuries. Justin Powell got injured on that team, and they didn't have Sharife Cooper most of the season. And so it was team that had a losing record. But yeah, I mean, he's still kicking around the G League, is he not? I think he is.
Yeah, he might be overseas as well.
Okay,
From what I saw, I'm not sure where it might have been. I don't want to say the wrong team, but I think he's in Greece or Spain, if I remember correctly.
I think he's in Spain.
All right, there you go. Well, shout out to Sharif, an all-timer, all-time hooper, and yeah, on Tahaad Pettiford. Honestly, I'm really high on Pettiford. Every time I watch him, like he brings that energy, that dog mentality that you hear about. Like he is hype at every turn, after every play, and it's more so just his two-way feel. Like he has crazy body control. Just he had a sequence against Texas that blew me away with like a nasty steal into like a jump pass while like driving and spinning into a layup. Just incredible body control and timing on that specific sequence, and just really was enough for me to kind of like stick in my brain. And then the Tennessee game was maybe a little lower for him, but he had some good plays, like forced steals, deflections, drew some fouls, plays with energy, had like a nice bump and finish, and shows like on that body control subject, like good deceleration as he's driving to the rim, like able to like hit the turbo button and the fast court and then stop on a dime for like a slow layup or even pump fake and get guys flying by. So just really impressed by that, like that athleticism, and then his shooting and scoring as well. Like I think if you're able to force turnovers and shoot the ball from deep, like we just mentioned with Chad, is that those are recipes for success at the next level, and he's just really impressive being able to do all that as a freshman, like you said. And to hit on some of his stats real quick, he's 91st percentile in pick and roll scoring, 97th percentile in spot up scoring, and 96 in handoffs on a little bit of a smaller volume. He's got 75 pick and rolls, 30 spot ups, and 13 handoffs so far this season. But when you throw passes on that, it's the 92nd percentile for pick and rolls, including passes, 1.138 points per game, and just like a efficient scorer, good feel looking for teammates, good feel making plays, jumping passing lanes, forcing turnovers. All that stuff, like, just really caught my eye. We'll see if I still have him that high. I did a big board with that Switch Theory project, and I had him top 20 after all that. Like, I was just blown away by some of everything he brings to the table. And then, 43% from three on catch and shoots, and also 39% from three on off the dribble threes. Like, he's showing that shooting versatility as a pull up and catch and shoot threat. That was really impressive. And then 86th percentile on floaters. In terms of points per shot, he's shooting 53% on floaters, only 15 of them, but 48% at the rim as well. Like a lot of good touch factors that could translate to good shooting at the next level. 81% free throw shooter, and got a positive assist to turnover ratio as well. So just a lot to like from Tahaad from a box score standpoint, and then like on the tape, these flashes, just incredible flashes of two-way feel. So what's it like been covering him all season, and kind of where do you see him going in the draft if he does leave this season?
Yeah, interesting point guard situation for them. They lose both of their guys from last year to the transfer portal. Aiden Holloway, that's obviously made a lot of headlines because he goes across the across the state to Alabama, but he was a guy that 5-star prospect, big volume shooter. He took 60 more threes than anyone else on this team last year and only shot 27%. And so I think that fit for him at Alabama made a lot of sense. Again, it's going to be cinema when they come to Neville Arena and he makes his return. But people kind of wondered what that role was going to be for Tahaad Pettiford, another 5-star. Auburn's pretty much had like one 5-star every year come in, or every other year in the recruiting process. And so we talked about Sharif Cooper. Bruce Pearl originally didn't want Tahaad to be a point guard. He said he's too talented of a scorer, and Auburn's system, he didn't want him to be overwhelmed and pigeonholed into that role just because he's short. He's like, Bruce Pearl was thinking, I can play him off the ball. Like I've played short guards before. We can make that work. Then the summer rolls around, and Tahaad Pettiford surprised this coaching staff with how well he picked things up in running the offense, and they were like, okay, this guy can be a point guard. And I think the biggest praise you can give him so far this season is we saw it in their second game of the year, and it's continued since then. He shows out when he needs to against the biggest competition on their schedule. I mean, he announced himself 21 points when they won against Houston in Houston. So obviously that was a that was a massive performance against one of the best backcourt defenses perennially in the country. When they lose at Duke, he was a guy who tried to will them back in that game. 20 points in Cameron, 18 points against Braden Smith and Purdue when they played in Birmingham. And then a couple weeks ago, they're without Johni Broome at Georgia, a team that's decent, but they needed to have somebody step up on the road. 24 points, some really clutch free throws. They're without Broome at South Carolina after his injury, and he had some clutch free throws in that game. As well, clutch free throws against Texas. I mean, he's a guy who has really shown up for them. Another area you can really praise him is Bruce Pearl always says he wants his best defenders on the floor at the end of games. Denver Jones is like one of Auburn's best on-ball defenders they've had under Bruce Pearl. Pretty much it's him or Bryce Brown when he makes that praise. Tahaad Pettiford's on the floor a lot at the end of games. Like, his defense is not as polished and consistent, but he is a guy that, I mean, when he's able to stay out of foul trouble, he's just a blur going for steals. I think he had 3 steals against LSU. I mean, they had 15 steals in the game. So I think he ended up having 2 or 3. I know he had a couple early on before he got in foul trouble. And just that shot creation for him is something you kind of can't replicate. You mentioned, I mean, he's 41% from deep on the season. You mentioned those catch and shoot numbers, the pull up numbers off the dribble. He kind of just works behind screens and is comfortable bombing it. And I feel like he's kind of the same efficiency when he's wide. He's one of those guys where it's like, catch and shoot, he's wide open. That's just as good of a look, or just as bad of a look as him, like one dribble from beyond NBA range. He's just kind of got that fearless scorer to him. And there have been times this year where, I mean, especially if Broome is on the bench, that's why Pettiford is such an important guy as a 6th man for Auburn, especially when Broome goes to the bench and you kind of need a little more gravity. Like, Auburn's got a lot of good players, but they don't have a lot of shot creators for themselves. Like, Baker-Mazara can do it, Broome can do it, and Pettiford can do it. And so when Pettiford starts to get a little more explosive, starts getting down the lane, we mentioned that Tennessee game, like, nobody could crack the perimeter defense. I mean, we talk about defense. I mean, Zakai Ziegler is like the guy when you talk about a point guard in college playing defense. I mean, it's just a brick wall back there. Pettiford wasn't perfect in that game. He had some freshman mistakes against maybe the number 2 or 3 defense in the country, but like, he was one of the only guys who could break in there. He had an and one finish in traffic. Obviously, his layup package and handles are like NBA level for sure. And so the size with him, like, he absolutely has to be a point guard at the next level, because I think Auburn lists him at 6'1". No chance. He may be 6 feet, I'd probably go 5'11" with him. But yeah, that's a storyline. That's something to follow down the stretch of the season here, where he ends up on draft boards, because if he keeps playing like this, I mean, if he's a freshman All-American, which I think he has the opportunity to do. I think he's one of the 5 or 6 best freshmen in the country right now, I would say. If he ends up getting those kinds of accolades and attention, we mentioned the draft process earlier, he's a guy who absolutely should go and figure out what he's worth. I would not be surprised if he's a guy who could get like a straight-up combine invite. Auburn will be sweating a little bit. They'll be biting their nails, because he is, like I mentioned, you get Baker-Mazara back next year. Next year's team won't be nearly as good. I mean, obviously, like, this team could be the number 1 overall seed, but he would be like your point guard next year. He'd be your number 1 guy. They're getting a really chaotic freshman in Caden Magwood, who's just like fill it up scorer, to be his backup next year. And so, they'd obviously love to have him back, but at the same time, like, if it's your time to go, Bruce Pearl's happy to push you out of the nest. And we'll see what happens with Tahaad Pettiford. I don't think many people thought he would be a one and done guy, but he's just fit so well on this team. It's a lot of his stuff doesn't even come within the system. Like, he is one of those guys who will come in, and that initial group, because Denver Jones is not a true point guard, and you have Johni Broome on the floor and Miles Kelly, who's a spot up shooter. That initial group is like, the coaches just get in there and they cook up their plays and they run them in the half court, and it's super, super efficient. Then when you got that second group on the floor with Tahaad Pettiford, Dylan Cardwell's just rim running and getting offensive rebounds, like, it's a little more free flowing, a little more pace. And so, again, that's one of the upsides of this Auburn team. Like, they can kind of do a lot of different stuff. They can run back and forth with Pettiford, whereas that other lineup would rather play in the half court because they're so efficient. And so, I mean, yeah, like you said, I've seen the draft boards in the first round for him. I mean, it's really, really impressive what he's done so far this season. It's another one of those NIL conversations. Like, that's one of the reasons they got Broome back last year. I mean, they got him. They got him paid. He was their number 1 priority. They were like, if we can lock him down, we can start building other pieces. And they didn't end up spending that much on other guys. Like, Miles Kelly was a really late addition. They actually missed on, like, they almost, they had Dylan Mitchell visit the Texas transfer. I think he ended up at Cincinnati. But they didn't get some of these guys because they didn't want to overspend for him because they just spent a bunch for Johni Broome. So Pettiford is another one of those guys where that will be the conversation probably. Hey, how much will you make on an early second round contract getting into the league versus, hey man, we can drop $1 million plus and keep you here. Would you like to do that and become a better NBA prospect? And so just a really good backup point guard for them, kind of what they needed. I'm not one of those people that bashes Aden Holloway. Like, I think it just didn't fit for him here. And I think at Alabama, it's absolutely fitting. And you're really happy to see that for a young kid. And so I think he just kind of got in his own head. He is a dynamite shooter, Aden Holloway is. And I think he kind of just got in his own head and was kind of not able to get out of that rut last year. Pettiford will go 7 or 8 straight and then come back the next game and go like 4 or 5 from 3. He's just kind of got this shooter's mentality. Seth Greenberg and Bruce Pearl both call him a Jersey hooper. He's a true Jersey guy who just gets in the gym and wants to put up shots and wants to attack every time he's on the floor. And so really, really interesting player because he's so different than some of these other guards Auburn has had over the years. And then Miles Kelly, again, I know we mentioned him earlier. I wonder if he's a guy that'll sneak in conversations. It's tough to get drafted. Like we sit here in January and I'm like, oh yeah, Auburn could have 4 guys drafted. It's really tough to get selected. And so, we'll see what happens there. But I think he is a guy that absolutely has a pro future. Such a 3-and-D guy. He's their best 3-point shooter on the team. Right now, I believe he's like 53% away from home this year from deep. I mean, that's pretty ridiculous. They just looked at him at the beginning of games. They're like, all right, you got it. We're going to run some stuff for you. And then he's decided, as a lot of players do under Bruce Pearl, it's like you play defense or you sit on the bench. Now, this isn't their most efficient defense they've had under Bruce Pearl, but it still is one that's capable of being really tenacious. And so he's sort of added that to his game. He is an example of a guy where what you see is not necessarily what you get from the stat sheet, because at Georgia Tech, his usage rate, I think, was like 7th in the ACC. It's like he's got to do everything. Like the team's not very good, doesn't have a lot of shooting. He's got to be the guy every possession. Now at Auburn, I don't know what his usage rate is on this team. Probably still pretty high, but it's like he's not the guy every single possession. Allows you to get more looks, allows people to forget about you every once in a while, and now he's one of the best 3-point shooters Auburn has had. So interested to see how his game is going to translate to the pros as well.
Yeah, we'll have to see how Chad Baker-Mazara and Miles Kelly kind of how the draft boards turn out for them. And, like we mentioned before, a March Madness run could make a big difference for some of these guys to really get higher stock. There's one less draft pick than before, so there's only 59 spots getting drafted this year. And, maybe a late run boosts some of these guys. And it is an interesting equation with Pettiford, just between the idea that now NIL can kind of compete with a second round pick salary or an undrafted salary conversation. And on top of that, you mentioned how maybe there will be more touches for him and Chad next year to kind of boost their stock even more for the following draft. Even with a guy like Magwood come in, who I caught at the top 100 camp, and I mean, he's a bucket. Like he's going to get tough shots. Like
pure chaos.
Yeah.
Pure chaos from an emotional standpoint, from a gameplay standpoint. I mean, if Pettiford and Magwood are their guards next year,
man,
I mean,
anything could happen anytime.
Literally, they could drop 30 apiece, or they could combine to shoot 2 of 17 from deep.
Right. Yeah, it does have a little bit of that. Magwood hits some tough shots, but Tahaad Pettiford is just explosive. He's the guy that breaks the script, as you said, and like gets downhill, has this 2-way feel, has that shooting touch, can. Maybe not the most fine-tuned defender at the point of attack yet, but at the very least jumps passing lanes and forces turnovers. And I think it can be a fine line between gambling, but also having the instincts to know that you have the athleticism to get there and break away on the break. So, he shows good instincts on both sides, good touch on both sides, or on the offensive end, and that explosive athleticism that I think that is just a really intriguing prospect that would be a little probably later in the draft this year and could end up a little higher this or next year. But like I'm pretty sold on some of what I've seen as far as his, just in terms of, is he worth a draft pick to bet on those skills to be a potential NBA player and possibly even higher. It kind of loosely, I try not to do comps directly, but just some of it reminds me of watching Colin Sexton with like that energy he brings and the shooting touch he brings and this downhill scoring and body control and all that. But, It's been great kind of diving into Auburn hoops with you, Nathan, and I appreciate you taking the time. It's a lot of fun hearing what it's like on the scene and breaking down some potential prospects from them. And good luck to the Tigers the rest of the season, and hope you enjoy it.
Yes, sir. Really, really appreciate it. I will say before we go, it's tough for the Magic right now, man. I think Jamal Mosley is maybe the third best coach we've ever had, but it's and I think just a month ago you were singing the praises about how well they were keeping this whole thing together. I'm interested to hear your perspective, because I don't watch every game. I don't watch games. I rarely watch any games, but I'll read a lot and kind of go back and watch stuff. It seems like Paolo and Franz coming back has kind of been thrown things out of whack a little bit. I do also wonder, if people realize, yes, it hurts to lose star players, but also Goga and Suggs, that stuff matters a lot too. Guys who hold it together, that really, really matters. So obviously hopeful that they're going to start putting it back together, because they've got guys, they've got their injured guys back now, starting to get, I know it's not still 100%, but it just seems like, I know I've seen the Paulo discourse, and it's been kind of tough to watch, because I do think he is a guy that absolutely could be one of the best players in the league within the next few seasons.
Yeah, it's interesting how underrated losing Goga and Suggs really has been. I think that's really the key point there, because when they lost Paulo for that big stretch, they still had Franz, Goga, and Suggs, and they could kind of let Franz run the offense, and they had this hustle culture, the Magic standard, they call it, of gritting and grinding for every single possession, defensively especially, where they're just not going to give up even if they're down 15. And that was spearheaded from the energy of guys like Suggs and Goga, even Mo Wagner off the bench, who's now out for the season. And then they lose Cole as well. And all these guys are high energy guys. So losing that energy kind of seems to clearly affect some of that, not the will to compete, but that comeback ferocity that we see. I mean, they had the biggest comeback in franchise history, and then they had another against the Heat, 20 down 25, I think, and then they had another one down 22 a few games later, where they were down by 20 points in the second half and still came back to win it. And that wasn't by shooting 53s; it was by grinding defensive possessions and just winning in the aggregate that way. So everyone is just about back. Suggs is day to day. I'm sure there was a little bit of kind of a slow cook build, I should say, to kind of bring Paulo back into the fold after missing so many games, and kind of reintegrate the entire offense around him after essentially being a team playing without him for 25, 30 games this season. So, they're still in the playoffs. They still got a top 3 defense on the season, and I think the schedule should be getting a little easier the rest of the way. So all we can do is hope we can actually keep this core 4 together at the top and Goga has been a part of that this season, I think, between his defensive impact and his playmaking, his play finishing, everything he brings as a big man. He's been absolutely integral to Orlando's success this year. So I think getting those guys back and healthy, which we're just about to do, they're slowly coming back here, drifting in, and Suggs should be back soon, but he's kind of day to day, and Goga's coming off a concussion, so that's a little sketchy type of a comeback, I guess, to do. So it's not the easiest thing, but I got faith. They're making the playoffs. They got a top 5. They should at least be just as good as last year, and they do have the same record to this point as last year, despite all those games that were missed by their star players. So a lot of the average fan would think Franz and Paulo are back, we're set. Well, we still got to have a team defense around those guys to really compete night to night. And if you're missing your 2 defensive anchors, it's tough to do. And Franz is obviously an elite defensive wing in his own right, and Paulo's been positive on that end too. But, it's just not quite the same without Goga and Suggs out there. So, we really want to see those 4. Anthony Black's been good in his time as well. I really love what I've seen from him. Very scalable, able to start at the point, defend starters, or go back to the bench at times. So, there's hope. But yeah, I'd say missing Goga and Suggs has been the big factor. And then I actually asked Coach Mosley that after one of the losses, that how I forget the record, but we're 1-9 at that point without Goga versus a 23-10 give or take record with him. And yeah, he just agreed that the team is clearly missing his inside presence. So, hopefully we get him back and we start rolling soon. You already know.
One of my favorite young guys too on this team is Tristan Da Silva. Like I was not. He's a first round pick, so like obviously he had the skills, but I was like, okay, like what exactly is the impact going to be from him on this team in particular? But he's really enjoyed what he's brought so far, and Anthony Black is kind of like has sort of those Suggs tendencies on defense, maybe a little bit more dynamic as an offensive player, and so. I love the young core of this team, and I was one of those people that maybe I feel a little vindicated now that Franz has been getting like the love he deserves. Goodness, that run, he would have been an all-star if he hadn't gotten hurt. That run was unbelievable for him. I was one of those people that didn't hate the signing, like in the offseason. Like I know people kind of wondered about the future with him and Paulo together, but my thought was like, you can't guarantee anything. Like if you've got a young player that works for your system, and he's playing well right now, just hold on to him. And it ended up mattering because they lose Paulo for a couple months.
Yeah, Franz is a clear star to me as well. Like he's just as important to Paulo as last year's playoff team, and like he might not get as many like highlights or cool fadeaway baseline jumpers, I suppose, in that sense. And he's not the number one pick, but like these are two max players. These are two rising all stars. Any team would take as their guys to build around. So, you got to reward both of them. And a lot of people got left with that tough Game 7 finish for Franz. And that's the last memory they have of him. And they're like, how do you pay that? Well, we wouldn't have got to Game 7 if he didn't go off in 2 or 3 other games along the way there. I think it was Game 4 and Game 6 where he just, he's the one that helped propel a victory. So, can't do it without him. And Da Silva, Black, some really good two-way winning players that the Magic have collected here. And, it's great. It's a great group. It's one of the most fun Magic teams I can remember, and definitely, since Dwight and they're much better. It seems to me than I was a big Oladipo guy back then, but they're better than those teams with Vucevic. So shout out Ola before we hop off. You gotta always shout out Ola when given the chance.
Always. Dude, I was talking to somebody the other day about the Anthony Bennett pick, and I was so happy when that happened because I was like, Depot's still on the board.
We got him.
I was happy about that one.
Man, all-timer. Well, always fun talking hoops and Magic hoops, Auburn hoops. I'll have to do it again sometime, Nathan. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you having me on.
You know it. Have a good one.
Learning Basketball is a Swish Theory podcast hosted from Beyond the Arcade. Hey, that's me. You can find my work on Twitter, YouTube, Substack, and check out the team's writing at theswishtheory.com.